Oh, good morning. Today is today's Monday, the 13th of November. And today we are in Jonah, the book of Jonah, chapter 2. Now, chapter 1, I'll just quickly bring us up to speed. The Lord speaks to Jonah, says, go to Nineveh and preach against it. Jonah instead goes down to Joppa, down on the coast, and he catches a boat to Tarshish. And so the Lord sends a storm, and the people on the ship are terrified, and they cast lots to see what the cause of the storm was, and revealed to them that Jonah was the cause. Jonah said, this storm's because of me. And they did everything they could to save the ship. And then finally, Jonah gets thrown overboard. The storm ceases. And God sends a great fish to swallow Jonah. And so he's in the belly of the fish. And that's where we pick up in chapter 2. And I'll just go ahead and read it. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish, saying, I called out to the Lord out of my distress, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice. For you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the flood surrounded me. All your waves and your billows passed over me. Then I said, I am driven away from your sight, yet I shall again look upon your holy temple. The waters closed in over me to take my life. The deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped around my head. At the roots of the mountains, I went down to the land whose bars close upon me forever. Yet you brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. When my life was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you, into your holy temple. Those who pay regard to vain idols forsake their hope of steadfast love. But I, with the voice of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed I will pay. Salvation belongs to the Lord. And the Lord spoke to the fish, and it vomited Jonah out upon the dry land. Now, this is a very familiar account that most people, I believe, scoff at. They would call it a good story, but Jesus believed it. Jesus taught that it was true, and there's nothing indicating historically or in any other writings that would indicate that anyone historically ever believed this was anything but a true account. So what's the lesson to be learned? There's several things that you can glean from this passage. Number one, you cannot flee from the presence of God. God called Jonah to go to Nineveh. He went in the opposite direction. So God changed his course. By drastic means, yes. But nonetheless, God changed his course. Brought a storm. Caused a great fish to swallow him up whole and take him back in the direction he needed to go in and spit him out on dry ground. So lesson number one, you cannot flee from the presence of God. Lesson number two, God is sovereign over the weather. God is sovereign over his creation. The Lord sent the storm. The Lord sent the fish. God can do what he wants to. He's God. What else do we see? We see God's mercy. We see God's goodness to Jonah. He could have used somebody else, but he chose to use Jonah. What else do we see in this passage? Well, we see his prayer was answered. We see answered prayer. God spared his life. So let's make application. Let's apply the specs for a moment and just ask the questions. Is there any sin for me to forsake? Any promise to claim, or principle to apply? Any example I can learn from? Any command to obey, or anything to be thankful for? When I think of sins to forsake, well, number one is disobedience. The thing that Jonah, the reason he's where he's at in the belly of a fish is because he disobeyed God. Lord commanded him to go to Nineveh and preach, and he refused to do it. And he found himself in a mess. And I remember the words of the Lord when King Saul was told to take the city and destroy everything. He did destroy everything, but he kept the sheep. And he kept the sheep and the livestock, and he kept the king alive, which he was supposed to destroy the king. And out of that incident, God said Saul will no longer be king. And the very well-known verse that says it is better to obey than to sacrifice. It's better to obey than to offer sacrifices. Jesus said, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. You'll obey. So that's the first principle I see. The sin to forsake is disobedience. Principles to apply. Well, we talked about a couple. God is sovereign in his creation. You cannot flee from the presence of the Lord. He's omnipresent. He's omnipotent. He's all powerful. He's omnipresent. You can't flee from his presence. We see both of those in this chapter. What about examples to learn from? Well, we see the poor example of Jonah fleeing from the presence of God, disobeying the Lord. And we see the consequences of that. So we need to learn from his example that, listen, if God has placed something on your heart that you need to do, just do it. Don't argue with him. Don't flee from it. Just do it. Commands to obey. Well, there's not a command given in this passage other than the command given to the fish to spit Jonah out. So that doesn't really apply to you and me. But what about the letter T, inspect? Is there anything to be thankful for? I'm thankful that my God is all powerful. I'm thankful that my God is all knowing, that there's nothing ever catches him off guard. I'm thankful that he's my ever-present help in my time of need. I'm thankful for answered prayer. My wife had an appointment this morning, and we went to breakfast afterwards, and a little waitress named Anna, we just asked her when she brought our food, I said, we're about to give thanks for this food. Is there anything we can pray for you about? And she just burst out in tears. She's from Ukraine. Her grandparents are there. Anastasia and Oleg. And she hasn't heard from them in a couple of days. And she's worried. And she's just a kid. And, you just never know. God brings people into our lives. God places us in situations where we're able to be an encouragement, able to be a blessing. And I'm thankful that it wasn't an accident that we sat at that table. It wasn't an accident that Anna was our waitress. And I know that when we prayed, that God heard our prayers regarding her grandparents. And I'm going to continue to pray for her grandparents' safety, as we all should pray for the situation in Ukraine and continue to pray for the situation in Gaza, in the Middle East. Because if anything we read in this passage, that one thing we can glean is that there's never a time when we're out of reach from God. And God hears our prayers even in the belly of a fish. Thank the Lord that He hears us. Amen. That's all I have for today. I hope you have a blessed day, and we will see you again tomorrow.